Good evening, and welcome back to Nightmares in Onyx. My name is Vincent. I'm glad you could join me here by the fire. There's a certain truth that comes out in the darkness, don't you think? We tell ourselves that some things are just stories, harmless tales to pass the time. But what if an object, severed from its owner, retained a will of its own? What if a piece of a man was more dangerous than the whole? Let's consider the story of a young man and his gruesome souvenir, a story called The Flayed Hand. It was about 8 months ago on a Friday night. A few of us from college were hanging out at our friend Louis R's apartment, just drinking, listening to music, talking about movies and art, the usual stuff you do when you're young and trying to sound smart. Suddenly, the door flew open and my childhood friend Pierre burst in like a whirlwind. "Guess where I've been?" he shouted, a wild look in his eyes. "A club downtown for sure," someone guessed. "No way," said another. "You're way too happy. You must have just gotten a loan or buried a rich uncle, or maybe you finally sold that old watch." A third friend laughed. "You're just sobering up, and you smelled the booze in Louis' apartment, so you came here to start over." "You're all wrong," Pierre shot back, a grin spreading across his face. "I just got back from this little town in Normandy. I was there for a week, and I brought back a souvenir. A new friend, you could say. A real monster. And I'd like to introduce you." With that, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a long, blackened hand. The skin had been stripped off, leaving the dried muscles and tendons exposed. It had been severed cleanly at the wrist. The shape was shriveled and tight, with yellowed nails still clinging to the fingertips. It was a genuinely horrifying thing to look at. He could see the powerful muscles, now hard as wood, held in place by what was left of the skin, which looked like old parchment. "So get this," Pierre said, holding it up for us to see. They were having an estate sale for this old sorcerer who just died. The guy was a local legend. They said that every Saturday night he'd fly off to meet with other occultists, and that he practiced black magic, and he could curse a farmer's cows. The old creep was obsessed with this hand. He claimed it belonged to a famous criminal from the 1700s, a guy who was executed for throwing his wife down a well. I can't say I blame him for that. And then hanging the priest who married them. After that, he went on a rampage. He robbed dozens of travelers, burned down a monastery with the monks still inside, and turned a convent into his own personal harem. We all just stared at it. "What on earth are you going to do with that thing?" we all asked, almost in unison. "What else?" Pierre said with a laugh. "I'm going to use it as a pull for my doorbell. That'll scare off anyone trying to collect a bet." Henry Smith, a big stoic English guy in our group, looked at it calmly. "I think that thing is just a piece of jerky, preserved with some weird process. I'd advise you to make soup out of it." "Don't joke about it," a medical student, already half drunk, slurred from his corner. "Pierre, if you know what's good for you, you'll give that thing a proper burial. You don't want the owner coming back to get it. Besides, you know the saying, he who has killed will kill again." "And he who has drunk will drink again," our host Louis replied, pouring the student another glass. The student downed it in one go and promptly slid under the table, completely passed out. We all burst out laughing. Pierre raised his own glass, saluting the shriveled hand. "I drink to the next time your master pays a visit," he toasted. After that, the conversation moved on, and eventually, we all headed back to our own places. The next day, around 2 in the afternoon, I was passing by Pierre's apartment and decided to stop in. I found him reading a book and smoking. "So, how's it going?" I asked. "Great," he said. "And your hand?" "My hand? Oh, you didn't see it. It's on the bell pull outside my door. I put it there as soon as I got home last night. But speaking of that, you won't believe this. Some idiot, probably trying to pull a prank, rang my doorbell around midnight last night. I asked who was there, but nobody answered. I just went back to bed and fell asleep. Just then the door opened and the landlord, a fat, arrogant man, walked in without even a hello. "Sir," he said to Pierre, I'm going to have to ask you to immediately remove that piece of rotting flesh that you've tied to your belt buckle. If you don't, I will have to ask you to leave." "Sir," Pierre responded with mock seriousness, "you are insulting a hand that does not deserve it. You should know it belonged to a man of very high breeding." The landlord just turned and walked out. Pierre followed him, took the hand off the bell, and brought it inside, attaching it to the pull cord for the light next to his bed. "That's better," he said. "This hand will be like a memento mori. It'll give me something serious to think about before I go to sleep each night." I stayed for another hour, then left and went back to my own place. I slept terribly that night. I was nervous and agitated, and I kept waking up with a start. At one point, I was convinced someone had broken into my room, and I jumped up, searching the closets and checking under the bed. Around 6 in the morning, I was finally starting to drift off, when a loud, frantic knocking at my door made me leap out of bed. It was Pierre's servant, half-dressed, pale and trembling. "Oh, sir," he cried, sobbing, "my poor master, someone has murdered him." I threw on my clothes and ran over to Pierre's apartment. The building was in chaos, full of people arguing and speculating. Everyone was talking at once. I pushed my way through the crowd to his bedroom, told the police who I was, and they let me in. 4 officers were in the middle of the room, taking notes, examining every detail, and talking in low voices. 2 doctors were leaning over the bed where Pierre lay unconscious. He wasn't dead, but his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His eyes were wide open, the pupils dilated, as if he were staring at something horrifying that only he could see. His hands were clenched into tight fists. I lifted the blanket that covered him and saw, on his neck, the deep, bruised mark of fingers. A few drops of blood stained his shirt. And then, something struck me. I noticed that the shriveled, flayed hand was no longer attached to the light cord. The doctors had probably removed it to avoid questions from all the people coming in and out. The sight of it was, after all, pretty gruesome. I didn't ask where it had gone. I'll just read you the story from the newspaper the next day. It has all the details the police could gather. A horrific attack was made yesterday on the life of a young student, Mr. Pierre B., who belongs to a prominent family in Normandy. He returned to his apartment around 10 o'clock in the evening and dismissed his valet, saying he was tired and going to bed. Around midnight, the valet was violently awakened by his master's bell ringing furiously. Frightened, he lit a lamp and waited. The bell stopped for about a minute, then rang again with such force that the servant, terrified, ran from his room to get the concierge, who then called the police. After about 15 minutes, 2 officers forced the door open. A terrible sight met their eyes. The furniture was overturned, indicating a violent struggle. In the middle of the room, on his back, his body rigid, his face pale, and his eyes wide with terror, lay the motionless form of young Pierre B., with the deep imprints of 5 fingers on his neck. A doctor was called immediately. His report states that the attacker must have possessed enormous strength and had an unusually thin, singular hand, as the fingers left 5 holes in the victim's flesh, like gunshot wounds, and they had penetrated so deeply that they almost met. There is no clue as to the motive of the crime or its perpetrator. The police are conducting a thorough investigation. The next day, the same paper published an update. Mr. Pierre B., the victim of the terrible assault we reported yesterday, has regained consciousness after 2 hours of intensive care from the doctor. His life is not in danger, but it is feared that his mind has been permanently affected. No trace of his assailant has been found. My poor friend had, indeed, lost his mind. For 7 months, I visited him every day at the hospital where we had placed him, but his reason never returned. In his delirium, he would say the strangest things. Like all madmen, he had a single 6th obsession. He believed he was constantly being pursued by a specter. One day, they sent for me in a hurry, telling me he was worse. When I arrived, I found him dying. For 2 hours, he was calm. Then, suddenly, He rose from his bed, fighting us off, and screamed, waving his arms in absolute terror. "Take it away! Take it away! It's strangling me! Help! Help!" He ran around the room twice, letting out horrible cries. Then he fell face down, dead. Since he was an orphan, it fell to me to take his body back to the small village in Normandy where his parents were buried. It was the same village he had just come from the night that he'd burst into Louis's apartment. His body was sealed in a lead coffin, and 4 days later, I walked sadly beside the old priest who had taught him as a child. We walked to the small cemetery where they were to dig his grave. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining from a cloudless sky. Birds were singing in the blackberry bushes, the same bushes where we had so often snuck away as children to eat the fruit. I could almost see us again, Pierre and me, creeping along behind the hedge, slipping through the gap we knew so well, down at the far end of the little plot where they buried the poor. We would return to the house with our faces and lips stained black with berry juice. I looked at the bushes. They were heavy with fruit. Without thinking, I picked one and put it to my lips. The priest had opened his prayer book and was murmuring his prayers in a low voice. At the end of the path, I could hear the sound of the gravediggers' spades as they opened the tomb. Suddenly, they called out. The priest closed his book and we went to see what was wrong. They had found another coffin. A stroke of a pickaxe had broken the lid, and inside we could see a skeleton of unusual size lying on its back. Its hollow eye sockets seemed to still menace and defy us. I felt a strange unease, almost fear. "Wait!" cried one of the men. "Look there! One of this monster's hands has been cut off at the wrist. Ah, here it is." And from beside the body he picked up a huge, withered hand and held it out to us. "Look!" cried another, laughing. "See how he glares at you, as if he's about to spring at your throat and make you give him his hand back?" "Go," said the priest, "leave the dead in peace and close the coffin. We will make poor Pierre's grave somewhere else." The next day it was all finished. I returned to Paris, after leaving a small sum with the old priest for masses. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What sort of life, what sort of rage must exist in a man for his very hand to carry out his murderous will after his death? Be careful what trophies you collect. Some things are better left buried. Thank you for listening. If this tale chilled you, please consider liking the video and subscribing. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next gathering around the campfire. And let me know in the comments below. What's the strangest object you've ever owned? Until next time, stay safe in the darkness.